Welcome to End of Life University. In this video, I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Barbara Karnes, who is one of the pioneers of the hospice movement here in the US. She and I talk all about the hospice journey and what it takes to enroll in hospice ourselves and to support a loved one through the process of hospice care. So I hope you enjoy it. Today, it is my very great honor to welcome back as my guest Barbara Karnes, and I'm sure many of you listening know Barbara, but I'm going to read her bio or parts of her bio just for anyone who's not familiar with her work. Barbara is an RN who is an internationally recognized author, speaker, thought leader, and expert on end-of-life care and the dynamics of dying. She is the author of the 1985 publication of Gone From My Sight, The Dying Experience, which so many of you, anyone who's worked in hospice, will know as the Little Blue Hospice book, which I will say it's been in every hospice I've ever worked at, and an amazing little book that's so very helpful for families. Gone From My Sight has sold over 30 million copies worldwide, is published in 12 languages, and remains the leading resource on the market today, educating families on the signs of approaching death. Barbara also has at least 4 films, and her film, New Rules for End-of-Life Care, was featured in film festivals around the world and was the recipient of 10 prestigious film awards. So you can learn more about all of Barbara's works, her books, her documentaries at bkbooks.com. So Barbara, welcome and thanks for joining me again.
Oh, I'm looking forward to a really good discussion today.
Yes, I am too, and I'm so grateful that you had the time to take out to talk with me. And I really wanted, since both of us have kind of a lot of years of experience in hospice, I thought it would be good to talk about the hospice journey kind of from A to Z and just start at the beginning for people who may not be familiar with hospice but may be at a place where it's time to consider it for themselves or a loved one. And I figured you're just the best person to have this conversation with. So we'll just kind of ramble on and tell people everything we know. But maybe we should just start by, for anyone who isn't certain what hospice care is, just so they understand that in the first place.
Okay, well, hospice takes care of people that have 6 months or less to live, people that the doctors have said, I can't fix you. And that's the time to reach out for support and guidance because it can be a really scary, uncertain time. And hospice provides nursing, social work service, home health aides to help with bathing, chaplains, and volunteers. I think a really special part of hospice is that the agencies will train local community citizens in end of life. And those volunteers are assigned to families as a friend, as a listener, as a person to give the caregiver a chance to get out of the house or maybe just go to bed and take a nap. So hospice offers services so that you won't be alone as you navigate the often scary situation that life will put all of us in as we approach the end of our life.
And one of the things I love about hospice care, it really is a unique type of medical care that is provided by a team of people, as you described. It's not just that, oh, you have a doctor or a nurse who visits you, but there's a whole team of people involved in care. And from what I've seen, that's absolutely the best type of care you can get when you're going through a challenging time like the end of life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, we don't have any role models on what it's like to die. And just think of how frightening it is to be told by the medical community, I can't help you anymore. And so to hospice is, wait a minute, the medical community can help you, and we will support and guide you through this experience. And, you know, you were talking about the history of hospice. We started outside of the medical model. Because a group of us recognized that the medical model was about diseases, was about fixing people, and they didn't really address what would happen when they couldn't fix someone. And so a group of us said, wait a minute, we've got some ideas here. We will help and support and guide people when they can't be fixed.
Yes, yes, that's so true. And so it's a perfect adjunct to traditional medical care because it fills in the gaps of things that traditional care doesn't offer. But I wanted to emphasize one of the reasons for us to share this information today is that lay people like family members and patients need to know about hospice themselves because their doctors may not recommend it to them. I still hear that. I still hear it from people all the time. The doctor didn't bring up hospice. I had to ask about it. So it's really important that people know enough to say that to the doctor and ask, how would I involve hospice?
Well, our medical model is about fixing people that have diseases. And what I like to say is that hospice is about taking care of people that have diseases rather than the medical model, which addresses the disease that people may have. And as we approach the end of our life, just because you can't heal the physical body doesn't mean there isn't healing to be done. You know, emotional, mental, spiritual healing, because we're more than just our physical body. And I think that's one of the gifts that hospice has, is that it helps guide a person and a family. And I think it's really important that we stress hospice just doesn't take care of a person. We take care of the entire family as they go through this experience.
And I wanted to emphasize too, if given the fact that patients and their loved ones might have to initiate the conversation about hospice, when is a good time to bring it up, because sometimes I fear that conversation doesn't happen until very close to the end of a patient's life, when there's not enough time for the hospice team to really come in and make as much impact as they could. So do you have thoughts on when should a family start talking about it or asking about it?
Um, I don't mean this to sound harsh, but I think all of us at some point or another have looked at someone who was very sick and said to ourselves, you know, he's not going to be here next year at this time. We've all thought it. And that's the time to start thinking hospice, because we give people more time than they really have. And I am for one to, when the doctor has said, I've given it my best shot and I can't fix you, you go and you start interviewing hospices. And most of our cities today have more than one hospice. And if you, right after you've been told, I'm having a difficult time fixing you, or I can't fix you, start interviewing and get, so that you are learning what is available. And when you're talking 6 months, then hospice, if you get on services early enough, hospice will help you live the best you can within the confines that your body and disease has put you in, but they're going to help you live. So the sooner you get on, the better, because they're going to guide you in this gift of time that you've been given. So the only downside to calling hospice too soon is for hospice to say, no, you're not really appropriate yet. But if this and this and this happens, call us. And I'd say that's not really much of a downside. So you can't call too early.
That's so true. And you made a good point. You referred to the idea of maybe interviewing more than one hospice because it's important for everyone to know not all hospices are alike. So it's helpful if you have more than one in your community to learn about them and see who the people are, meet people there and see what feels right to you because there's a big difference in hospices and who they employ and how they operate.
Yeah, it's you know, when I started out in hospice, a city, literally a city was lucky to have one or two hospices. But today there's a plethora, a new word, a plethora of hospices in most cities. Often towns have more than one. It's the rural community that doesn't necessarily have access to as many hospices as I would like to see them have.
Yeah, that's very true. And something I hope that we can make inroads there and
Mhm.
expand the reach of hospice. But another thing that you referred to is that this is a big myth of people who have heard of hospice think it's about dying and you just admit people and they die right away. But in fact, you emphasize that hospice is really about living fully all of the remaining days of life. And it's just so important that we get that message across to people.
Oh, well, and what's so sad for me is that because people associate hospice with, well, dad has to, is, we call them when the person is dying. Well, a person looks like they're dying 1 to 3 weeks before they die. In the months before death, when that disease is moving and growing, and in those months, a person looks sick, but they don't look like they're dying. And don't wait until you look at someone and go, oh my gosh, I think he's dying. Because that is 1 to 3 weeks. And what happens is hospice comes in and they do crisis intervention because no one has really said, we're looking now at a week or so from death. And because we don't have any role models on what it's like to die the way this person is dying, naturally, normally will not look like our role models, which is television and the movies, look like. So we think something pathological is happening. And so the hospice then is just doing crisis intervention to help and support the family in this dying time. If you make earlier referrals when the person looks sick, but hasn't entered the dying process, then we can help everyone live. Because that's what we're about. Live until you're not.
And I'm sure that you have, like as I do, just dozens and dozens or hundreds of stories of people who got on hospice earlier and were able to go on a fishing trip, were able to go visit someone, a loved one somewhere, enjoyed all their favorite foods, for the last few months of life. Like people who really did get to say, this is what I need to make my life full. And because of the support they got from hospice, they actually were able to experience that.
Oh, absolutely. I remember Charles, who went to Hawaii, and he and his wife, that was their favorite place in all the world. And catheter in tow, he and his wife flew to Hawaii and stayed for a week and then came back. Or the woman that I took care of that loved Las Vegas and went to I took her to the airport, got her on the airplane, and she flew for the weekend to Las Vegas. And so, you look at your bucket list, and if it's possible, we're going to help you fill that bucket list. But we need the time to do that. We need that in the months before death, when we can work with your physical body and your physical limitations, but you're alert, where once you enter that dying process, you're really going to be withdrawing and have withdrawn, and you won't be interested. You won't even care about a bucket list in the week or so before death.
Yeah. I remember we had a father who regretted so much that he had never been able to take his children to Disneyland. So we had a donor from our community who paid for flights and tickets for his whole family to Disneyland, and we sent a nurse along with them to make sure that everything was okay, that he still had someone with eyes on him and looking after him. And they went to Disneyland for a weekend. And so he was so grateful, and he had so much of a sense of meaning and purpose in fulfilling that dream of his, and knowing that he would leave his children with this incredible memory of getting to go to Disneyland with him.
Yeah. Well, and that's what hospice, if we get the referral soon enough, we can help people live.
Yeah, I will say the hospice team has been the most creative medical team I've ever worked on. I've always, that's one thing I've loved about it, but being in a situation where everyone puts their heads together and says, how can we make this happen? How can we solve this problem? How can we do this and accomplish it? And it's really incredible to see some of the stories that come from that kind of work.
Well, and as you're talking, I'm remembering I had my mother on hospice, and in my home. And here is I'll tell you this story because I want to make a point that the guidance that you can get during this challenging time. My mother and I didn't have a fantastic relationship. And now she's living with me, and I'm her primary caregiver. And I quit my job as the director of a hospice so I can take care of her. But I have my hospice team. And I was really struggling with taking care of her. And I called my hospice social worker one morning crying. And I said, Diane, I realize I don't love my mother. And I am just sobbing. And she said, I'll be right there. She came over. She was there within 30 minutes. She probably broke every speeding record there was. And we went in my bedroom, and she sat with me and let me cry it out. And then she said, Barbara, I want you to know that you are loving your mother. Love is a verb. It's an action word, and you are loving her in the care you are giving her. think of the wisdom.
Wow.
That's what hospice does. Yes, they'll help us get to Hawaii, but it's that kind of emotional support that you're not alone as you're taking care of your special person. All kinds of stuff comes up
Yeah, I was
and
just going
they
to
help
say
you.
that. Yeah, all of these emotional issues come to the surface, and sometimes tension between family members, and we all need help with those situations, but it can be such a fruitful time of healing and growth and just beginning to have compassion for ourselves and learning more about ourselves as we go through it. But that's why the fact that we have a team of people like the social worker, the chaplain, the home health aide, the nurse, the volunteer, all of these people who are there with their unique talents and wisdom and expertise to offer. So I wanted to maybe look at it for someone who's wondering, like, should I put my parents on hospice? Should I see if I could enroll them? About what it actually takes to do hospice care at home, because sometimes I think people also have a misunderstanding that hospice may come in and provide 24/7 care, and it's important that people understand that that's not what hospice offers. So people need to know exactly what it takes to care for someone at home to know if they're able to do it or not.
Well, and it's 24/7 care for the caregiver, um, taking care of someone at home. Hospice provides skilled nursing visits, and depending upon how close to death the person is going to depend upon the number of home visits that are made. Um, my rule of thumb, and every hospice is different, but my rule of thumb has always been that if a person is months from death, then you visit once a week. Um, any, to as death gets closer and labor begins, and if I think it's weeks before death, then my recommendation is at least twice a week and maybe 3 times a week. When you're down to days out and hours, then you visit every day. And I used to, if someone was close enough, I may visit them first thing in the morning and the last thing in the evening. Bottom line is there is someone on call 24/7. And so the goblins always come out in the middle of the night. The goblins are always out at 3 o'clock in the morning. And you pick up the phone and you call hospice and you say, oh my gosh, dad is doing this and this and this, and I'm scared. And hospice will come out, and or we used to. Now there's a lot of phone action, but hopefully hospices will come out and support you and look at your loved one.
But it is important that there's someone who can be in the home with the patient 24/7. It doesn't have to be the same person. I mean, and it's probably actually nice if it's shared, like shared family members helping with care. So that's sometimes a big factor for families to consider, is who has the time to be there and actually be available day and night to take care of a loved one. So it's important in advance to know about that and have these discussions as a family too. Who can help, who will be here, who will show up and do the work.
Oh, excellent point, because it's 24/7 work. It's not easy taking care of someone as end of life approaches. Uh, but it's also can be the most sacred, wonderful experience ever. But it's really hard to do it alone. And that's why you want to reach out. And for just one person to be that caregiver is really challenging, because as I said, the goblins come out at night, And so hospice does have volunteers that will come and patient sit, so you can go to the grocery store. And because they're a team, you've got your social worker, but the nurse will make scheduled visits. They don't do shift work. And the social worker and the chaplain will do scheduled visits. But the only kind of shift you might get is from a volunteer, but they're not going to do physical care. They're going to be there in the home, but they're not giving baths. They're not changing patient linens or anything like that.
And I think it's really important to know that and just plan ahead who is your personal team who's going to be there and who will come and stay when you want to go to the grocery store or when you just need time away. And how can you divide the labor up? Because sometimes I think that's the thing caregivers struggle with is how to delegate tasks and getting the support they need to have. So it's good to think about it in advance and plan that out.
Oh, absolutely. And the volunteers are such an integral part of allowing some respite time. You know, the caregiver, sometimes all that caregiver needs is sleep, you know, is someone to be in the home so that the caregiver can go to bed. Or maybe just go out on the porch and read, you know, something just to have some quiet time. And that's where the volunteers come in big time.
And it was interesting. I just talked to a woman a few days ago who told me she was caring for her father at home and he needed to just get out of bed and into his wheelchair, and she was home alone with him and she had no idea how to do that, how to help him. So there are skills that can be extremely helpful to caregivers that they really should have, but the hospital staff, if they're when they're bringing someone home from the hospital, is not likely to teach them those skills, and they that might be something they need to seek out. And the hospice staff can teach them, but they may need to make sure the hospice staff knows, I want you to train me and tell me what I need to know.
Well, and that's a good point in that hospices also have occupational therapists and physical therapists, and their skills working with the caregiver are as important. You know, the patient may be beyond occupational therapy and physical therapy, but the caregiver can have that occupational therapist come in and say, here's how you transfer from bed to wheelchair or bed to commode. And yeah, that's a nice service to have.
Yes, definitely. And I wanted to mention some of the things that a caregiver might need to do for their loved one at home. Like oftentimes the caregiver ends up administering medications. It's under the supervision of the nurse who will explain the medications and how and when they're given, but it's usually the caregiver who gives those medications. And then just other tasks that the caregiver might perform for their loved one.
Well, and one of the things that I've learned is that we have to write everything down, you know, and so as a caregiver, we instruct and guide them into making a list. You write down all those medications, you write down the times that you're supposed to give them, cross it off when you give it, write down how often they pee. Did they poop today? The caregiver has so much responsibility that they're not going to remember any of this as a day goes on. And so a paper and pencil becomes their best friend because you just write everything down. Now, I always, with my families, I made the list. And as a nurse, I wrote down the medications. I wrote down everything I wanted to know about this patient so that when I wasn't there, the 24, it would be 23/6 that I wasn't there, the caregiver could record, and that would guide me as the nurse as to what was needed and not needed. But as a caregiver, you can't rely on your memory. You have to write everything down.
It's so true because in the midst of sometimes having disrupted sleep and just kind of constantly being in crisis mode in a way, you can't tell one day from the previous day and all of it will get muddled together.
Yes. I have a hard enough time and I'm not a caregiver. So, and I think, life is stressful. And then you add on the caregiving and the fact that someone you love very much or don't love, because we end up taking care of people that we don't necessarily love, that we have issues with, and that will often compound the emotional energy that is going on in caregiving. I see a lot of families that, of course, there is no perfect family. We all have our ups and downs, but where there's tension between family members, and yet the responsibility of this is my dad, and we may not have had a good relationship, but I'm going to be there for him. And that's where the support from the hospice team can help with those emotions that are actually going to make the physical job harder.
Yes. Oh, yes. That's so true. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions for people in how to talk about hospice if they say they have a parent that they would like to enroll in hospice who might be resistant to the idea. Do you have thoughts on how to talk to them about it? I actually went through that with my own mother, who was really reluctant to go on hospice, even though she knew I'd worked in hospice all these years and she knew everything about it. But it was very hard for her to say yes to that decision. So sometimes that's one of the most important conversations we can have.
It is, because to say yes to hospice is saying, yes, I'm going to die. And that's hard. I mean, that's hard to come to that realization. And I get asked a lot about, mom doesn't want to talk about it, and yet I really think we need hospice. And so you say to mom, I know you don't want to talk about this, but I need to have this talk. And please give me this gift of hearing me out, of listening to me. And then I'm going to respect your decision. This is your life experience. But mom, I need you to hear what I'm dealing with, what I'm thinking, and what my ideas are. And
Mm.
you be honest. You know, I know you don't want to talk about it, but give me this gift. Let's do it this time. Let's talk.
That's the perfect way actually to introduce it to a parent, because it's hard for a parent to turn down their own child when the child says, "This it's important to me. I need to talk about it."
Yeah. But as a spouse, you can do the same thing. You can also say, number one, I need to talk about this. And so bear with me, sit down with me, let's talk. And as a spouse, you can say, I'm going to be your caregiver and I need help. Do this because I need the support and the guidance. You will give me a gift, put it on you, the caregiver. Help me with this. I need it.
No,
Rather than saying you need this.
mm-hmm, that's
When,
perfect.
yeah, when they may not want to They're not ready to deal with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. I love that approach. And then I wanted to talk too about kind of the hallmark of hospice care is that it's comfort care. The emphasis is on making sure patients are comfortable, that we treat their physical symptoms and pain. But I still hear, again, another myth about hospice all the time from people is, oh, in hospice, you overdose patients on medications, and which is not true at all. But I wanted to ask you to just talk about that and how you counter that myth.
Well, I'll be very blunt to start with, and that is hospice makes its money the longer people are on service. They are not about killing people that come on service. That's not how they can stay in business. So even if you, I mean, that's not dealing with the moral issues. That's just the practical, it's a business and they are paid per day that the patient is alive on service. So they want to keep their patients alive as long as possible within providing comfort care. Their hospice is not about prolonging life. They are letting life unfold in its natural progression. And whereas the medical model in the hospital, they're about prolonging life. Hospice is not about prolonging, but they're not about shortening it. They're just about letting it unfold naturally. And most people don't know that there are, or even think about, that there are two ways to die. You either die fast, getting hit by a truck, having a heart attack, or suicide, where you're alive 1 minute and dead the next, or you die gradually. The body will gradually approach death, and that's either through old age, no disease, it just gets old and eventually wears out and stops, or disease. Disease is one of the ways that the spirit that we all are chooses to get out of this body. So by bringing hospice on, their focus, as we've said, is to help a person live the best they can until they're not. And it is just the idea that hospice is purposely ending life is just ridiculous. I mean, it goes, not only is it illegal, but it goes against everything that hospice philosophy is about.
And I will say, as a doctor, I knew almost nothing about pain management until I did get involved in hospice, and just learning how to titrate medications very carefully and how to combine certain medications for symptom relief. I'd never learned it before. I had no experience, but it was in hospice that I learned it, and I was amazed at how much relief we could bring to patients and still allow them to be awake and alert and interact with their families. And so that's the one thing I want people to know. It isn't just that people come on hospice and we drug them and they're comatose. Occasionally that may happen, or that may be part of the dying process, but that's not at all what hospice is about or hospice does for people.
Well, taking care of someone at the end of life is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. But most people don't know that. And so end of life work is judged by how people get better, unless we teach them otherwise. And that involves symptom control. It involves pain management. It's different than how someone who's going to get better will be treated. And it's our job to teach the community and our families and our patients, if we get them soon enough, the difference.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And one of the things your book, Gone from My Sight, it's so good at teaching people about what dying actually looks like the stages of dying shortly before death, because most people know nothing about that. Most people have never seen anyone die and have no idea what to watch for or what to expect when someone dies. And as you said, it doesn't look like the movies that we may have seen. So I think that would be a good thing too, to talk about the last few days of life and what the dying process actually looks like.
Okay, well, let's break it down into months, weeks, days, and hours. You can't put a number on how long someone has to live. The closest you can get is months, weeks, days, and hours. And what you're going to look for someone who has a gradual death. Remember, I mentioned fast or gradual. A gradual death, old age is going to take longer. So when I talk about the signs of approaching death, that someone who has a disease, when I talk about months, someone who's just old, you're going to have years. It isn't until we get down to days, hours, and minutes that everyone dies the same. All right. So 2, 3, 4 months before death from disease, 3 things start happening. You don't have to know blood values. You don't even have to know a person's disease to just look at these 3 things: a person's eating habits, their sleeping habits, and their social interaction habits. Eating, 2, 3, 4 months before death, a person will stop eating meat. And then pretty soon it's fruits and vegetables. This is on a continuum over these 2 to 3 to 4 months. Meat, fruits and vegetables, then anything that requires energy to digest. Then they get to soft foods. You're doing good if you can get yogurts and creamed soup, scrambled eggs, ice cream. We love our ice cream. You can get ice cream down almost to the very end. But then in the weeks to days before death, you're not getting any food and generally not any water down them either. So think about food as the energy we put in our body to make it go. And if the body's preparing to die, it doesn't want the energy. And so all by itself, it will cut back and stop eating.
That's a really good point to point out, because some families feel they should force their loved one to eat, or they try to make special dishes and even apply guilt to try to get their loved one to eat. And it's fine to allow them to not eat if they choose not to and they don't feel like it.
Always, always offer, but don't force the food. You know, they want to eat. They want to eat for us because they see what their not eating does to us. But they'll say, I can't eat. I can't. And it's because the body doesn't want the energy, the grounding. The other thing is sleep. Again, over a period of months, a person will start with an afternoon nap, and then a morning and an afternoon nap, and then they're asleep all evening. And then one day they don't get out of bed, and then they're asleep more than awake. And then with social interactions, again, it starts with they're not interested in their favorite sports or what's going on in the world around them. And then it's pretty soon, don't have the church ladies come over. And then they withdraw from family themselves and they actually go completely within, which is what they should do. In the weeks before death, 1 to 3, you will notice a significant change. And that key change is a person starts sleeping with their eyes partially open. They start picking their clothes, the random hand movements, the start and stop breathing. All of these are significant changes. And that says to us, labor has begun. Takes, you know, it's like that little chicken. We go, let me say it this way. We are birthed into this world. We go through labor to get into this world, and we go through labor to leave it. It's work to get out of our body, and it takes 1 to 3 weeks. And all of our attention is directed toward getting out of our body. So there isn't conversations. There isn't watching TV. They're sleeping and getting out of their body. There are other changes that say death is within minutes to hours. Now their hands and feet are bluish, dark colored. You probably can't even get a blood pressure. They're non-responsive. And that's just before they let go is when you're going to see the facial expression, the grimace, the frown. Congestion is going to depend upon how much fluids they have in their body. It is natural and normal to be dehydrated. When we're dehydrated, our calcium goes up. And if your calcium goes up high enough, you close your eyes, you go to sleep, and you don't wake up. And that's the natural way that the body dies. How's that for 25 words or less?
That's that's a great summary, but I was just thinking of how unfamiliar people are in general with any of these signs, and that it would just be so helpful if everyone was aware of this and had this basic knowledge, which I have to imagine 150 years ago people had seen loved ones die in the home and were more familiar with these signs and changes that happen, and understand this is just natural. It's a natural part of death and dying. And in fact, people in this process do not need to be taken to the emergency room, because I think sometimes when we see someone going through these changes, people might panic and think, gosh, this doesn't seem normal or doesn't seem right, and want to take a person to the emergency room, which could be the worst possible thing that could happen.
Oh, absolutely. This is why I wrote Gone from My Sight, so that a family and the caregivers could read and say, oh my gosh, dad's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And that is reassuring. Your point about grandma, I think, is so interesting and actually important in our understanding, is in that grandma used to live at home. And when she got sick, she went to the upstairs bedroom, and there she died. And we were there, and we were supportive, and we accepted that grandma's old or grandma's sick and she's going to die, that this was part of the cycle of life. And we were there, and we saw it happening, and it was just normal. Then medicine, we became more medically oriented, and grandma went from being sick at home into the hospital or into a nursing facility. And then grandma died away from us, and we didn't see it. We didn't watch the natural progression. We got a call that grandma's died. And the next time we saw her was in a funeral home in a casket with a dress we had to go by. Hospice in the 70s the late 70s, early 80s, when it came on the scene, the idea was, let's bring dying back into the home, into its natural place. Nobody wants to die in the hospital. It is not a natural place to die in. And yet dying is very natural. We're all going to do it. It's part of our life experience. So hospice has really helped us refocus on the naturalness of the dying experience.
Yes, that is so well said. And it's a beautiful natural process when we allow it to unfold. You used that word, which I really like also. But unfortunately, in a medical facility like a hospital, um, the the objective of the people who work there is to interrupt the natural process, to do whatever they can to prolong life, even when that life is just a fragile thread, to prolong it as long as possible. And we really have to come to terms with that, really think about what we want for ourselves and for our loved ones.
And that's why advanced directives, before we need them, is so important. Because if we don't have an advanced directive, if we don't outline how we want to be treated if we're very, very ill, then the medical establishment will treat us the way they think they should. And their job is to fight death. Even if they know they're not going to win, their job is to fight it at all costs. That's why during COVID, it's been so hard on our healthcare professionals, because for most healthcare professionals, death is a failure, where those that work in hospice see it as a natural progression to living.
Oh, it's so true. And you can just see the burnout that's happened for doctors and nurses alike in hospitals who are not so comfortable being with death and dying, and then really got overwhelmed by it and didn't know how to handle that emotionally. And yet, I think working in hospice gives you such a different perspective and allows you to see the sacredness in dying, and to be a participant in the sense of we're supporting the natural process and we're helping this family get through it. And it's so gratifying and so wonderful to be part of.
No, it is. I mean, I've 40 years worth of this work, and it's what I'm on the planet for.
Yeah. Yeah, clearly, because you're such a great teacher for all the rest of us, and so inspiring for how to approach this work, and uh, that really we all need to be educated. It's not just that we should have a specialty hospice staff who understands death and dying. Everyone should understand it. Everyone should know these things that we're talking about.
Absolutely, all of us. I
Yeah.
mean, all of the healthcare professionals need to have a course in end of life. Um, and wouldn't it be interesting if high schools had a course in end of life? I used to, when I was in Kansas City, every semester, I went to a local high school and did a workshop, a class on end of life. And then afterwards, had any students that were dealing with any particular issues could come and talk to me privately. And I was so proud of that class, to be able to do that, because it's a life skill. This is one of our life skills, and yet we don't teach it.
Yes, and you're right. High school would be the perfect age group to teach that to, because you can bet that many of them are already asking questions and already thinking about it, but they don't have anyone they can go to with those questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was wondering, Barbara, if you do you have any other tips for someone who's thinking about enrolling a parent in hospice or just getting started taking care of a loved one at the end of life? Any other suggestions you have? You already have made a lot of them for us, but
Well, I think the key thing is um, reach out. You have nothing to lose by calling hospice and saying, you know, my doctor hasn't said anything, which is too bad, but I'm worried and I'm concerned. Could someone come and just talk to me? And, you know, like I said before, the worst thing that can happen is they can say, no, he's not appropriate. I would start with calling your physician and saying, I'm thinking about hospice and talk to me about it. But even if the doctor says, nah, he's not ready, call hospice anyway and say, I talked to my doctor. He said, dad's not really ready, but come talk to me. Tell me so that when we are ready, we'll know when we're ready and we'll know how to reach out. Do your homework before you really need to, is my best advice. Don't hesitate to call before you're drowning, because then think of all the time you've wasted, all the good support you could have had if you wait until you're drowning.
hmm. Oh, that's such good advice. And just remember, it's possible that you have a medical provider who either doesn't know very much about hospice or isn't comfortable talking about it or doesn't know what to say. So just understand that may not be where the recommendation initially comes from, and it's perfectly fine. In fact, hospices are used to that, having family members call up themselves to ask questions and to begin that interaction together. It doesn't have to be initiated by a doctor.
Yeah. And I think in today's environment that the more we educate the community, the more understanding and the more comfortable the community will be in reaching out. And that's, what you're doing, the good work that you're doing is getting the education out there, getting the knowledge out there.
Yeah, and I wanted to direct people back to your website again, bkbooks.com, because you have DVDs available there that I mean, though that could be a great way to provide education if you have a group that meets together regularly, a social group. Show one of the DVDs and have a conversation about
Groups.
end of
Yes.
life issues. And let's see, you have well, new rules for end of life care, and the care for the caregiver. This is how people die. Those are excellent DVDs that people could watch together and have a conversation about. And all of your books have just such practical information, and they're so informative for people also.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Each one of the books, and I've got a whole slew of them, what, maybe 12, 10, I don't know.
I
Anyway,
think,
each
yeah.
one is fifth grade level, short, 13, 14 pages, large print, easy to read. Because when you don't want to read a 250-page book, but you can get through 14. And each book that I wrote was out of what I saw as a need that people have. The book on dementia, dementia at end of life. And we didn't even touch into that today. But dementia doesn't play by the rules. And so I wrote about dementia at an end of life, pain management, so that people will understand pain at end of life, a grief booklet, what to do in the hours to days before death. All of these because I saw a need in the community.
And so the books are inexpensive. You can buy them as a bundle of books, and they're wonderful resources to have on hand. As I was saying, a lot of hospices have them and give them out to families, which they should, but it's a great resource to have for anyone too, especially if you have older loved ones and you're going to be dealing with these issues. It's a good way to get educated about it. So, Barbara, thanks so much for having this conversation with me. I think it was a good review. As you said, we can have another separate episode just on Alzheimer's and many other topics, but it was good to have just this basic discussion about hospice together.
Well, thank you for inviting me again. We just kind of are able to just talk. We do kind of a good job of that. And I really appreciate you reaching out to me. Both of us, it's all about the education. So good work.
Definitely. Same to you. And I know you have a new book on the way. So I'll tell people again, just go to your website, I guess, to find out, or sign up for your newsletter.
Oh, yes. My weekly blog that I write. You can just sign up and you'll get an email with the blog in it.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for this time. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Same here. And we'll be in touch.
Okay, we'll do it again.
All right.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Barbara Karnes. Barbara is such a wealth of information and insight about the hospice experience, with so many years behind her in her career and so very many patients and families whose lives she's touched. So I'm always happy to learn from her and to share her wisdom with other people. And I encourage you to go to her website, BK Books, check out the booklets and books and DVDs she has there, which you might find helpful if you're not already using them in the work that you're doing. Remember, if you enjoy this content, it's really helpful if you share it with other people. Let them know about the podcast, show them how to find it in whatever app they have available in their smartphone, and then how to subscribe to the podcast. I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button when you're listening in, and then leave a rating and review if you're so inclined. That's really helpful to improve our rankings and makes this podcast more visible for people who are looking for content like this. Also, remember, I have a channel on YouTube, so go check that out, End of Life University on YouTube. If you like watching videos, you'll be able to see the conversations I'm having with people and with all the mistakes that we make, whatever, because they're not usually edited very much, but I know some of you might really enjoy that. And finally, don't forget, your support is always welcome to help defray the costs of this podcast, and you can go to eoluniversity.com/support. So until we're together next week for another interview, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life may bring you next, and just love each and every precious moment of your life. Bye-bye.